Hey, welcome back to the KC Growing Good podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Nadia Vandercube, and today I'm excited to have our newest team member, Gustavo Santos, who has now joined KC as our COO. And so welcome, Gustavo.
Thank you. Very good to be here with you, Nadia.
Yeah, we're excited. And today we're going to be talking a lot about systems and processes, particularly for nonprofits that are experiencing growth. And part of the reason Gustavo has joined our team is because KC, as a company, as an agency, is growing quickly as well. And we needed someone like Gustavo, who is a genius around systems and operations to help us scale. So today we're going to talk about things that Gustavo loves. And we're going to talk mostly about the top three sort of operational issues that we see emerging in growing nonprofits and what actually helps fix them. So Gustavo, I'm excited about this conversation. We've already been doing this work as an agency ourselves with KC with you. So let's talk about these things. And I think we're going to start with leadership, where it all begins.
That's right. Yes. Thank you, Nadia. Yeah. So for this conversation, I was thinking of what would be the three major issues that we see in our work with other nonprofits. And as you mentioned as well, we as Casey went through the same kind of issues in a little bit. But I think these are issues that we are preventable. And that's part of the good news of all of this, right? So I think the first one, as you said, has to do with leadership for sure. But more specifically, I think what we're talking about here is to have a leader that brings a lot of vision to the organization, but doesn't have necessarily an operational anchor. Does that sound familiar to you at all? To you, Nadia, or to you listeners? you know,
Yeah,
usually
I think some of us could resonate with that.
That's right. So usually what happens is, and I swear to God, I'm not talking about anybody specifically here, okay? So let's say we have a strong and visionary executive director, or sometimes that's also the founder of that organization.
Right.
And then that person is deeply mission driven, which is also like what gave that person the energy sometimes to start something or to lead an organization that's kind of connected to the mission on the ground. And very often, that person is also the primary fundraiser and the external face of the organization. Does that sound familiar to you?
I think we could even be honest and say that is how KC started. We have a visionary CEO in Marku who sets our course in a lot of ways, which is very fun to be partnered with.
Yeah. And the tension though is, as we experienced, but many of the nonprofits that we work with end up experiencing, is that as a natural consequence, you have the strategy that kind of lives mostly in their head, in the leader's head. You have the tension that kind of grows when complexity grows as well, because the day-to-day execution is fragmented, right? Like you have this person that's responsible for the public face of the organization doing 1 million things here and there, and then execution on the ground keeps kind of get fragmented as complexity grows. And as a consequence of that, our teams end up like with unclear priorities. Nobody knows who owns what, and the sequencing of execution gets kind of lost, right? So what kind of the way that this shows up in the work is work gets duplicated, so you have people doing the same things that you were
Right.
doing. Decision making gets kind of slow, and they're out there stall or get kind of lost, or sometimes you have to revisit decisions all the time. And then that kind of creates a tension within the team as well, in the sense of the feeling is of it's an unsafe place to be in a way, because you never know what's going to come at you, right? And then, of course, you have the quietly abandonment or quiet abandonment of those people. Sometimes people get just kind of worn out and they kind of, end up leaving sometimes the organization just because of that kind of lack of clarity, right? So what's happening there is, you have the leader from the visionary, the leader becomes the bottleneck at that point, and then staff kind of starts burning out. You have like missed opportunities of growth for the fundraising part of things as well, and then donors end up feeling that tension as well, because if they see what's going on inside, they have like a window into that. It becomes a little bit kind of harder to contribute to that mission. So we do have like a few ideas about how to go about this, but like I will just kind of pause there. Like how would you react to that?
Yeah, I think what's really important to realize here is that the founder or the ED or the CEO, the visionary leader, like not one person can have all the giftings to run an organization or a business. The visionary is the visionary because they have this amazing capacity to wonder and to see potential, and that they don't necessarily, and they have like a 50,000 foot view of what could happen and what, but they don't necessarily want to or find life in the 5,000 foot view. And I think if an ED or a leader can recognize that, then you kind of move towards what I think you're headed this way around resolution. But I just want to pause and acknowledge, like, this is not a failure on the CEO or ED's part. That this happens. It's more of a when do you recognize it and when do you fix it sort of thing. And to acknowledge that we are, teams come with a variety of gifts, and we don't need the CEO to also be in the weeds around some stuff. So we hire people like you.
Exactly. And I feel like this is exactly what we have seen as well, as a potential solution for this kind of issues, right? And not only, as you mentioned, for Casey, but like for our clients as well. The one thing we see that makes a lot of sense in the big picture is to have someone that could be that kind of operational right hand, right? For the CEO, for the executive director, for the leader of the organization. We need someone that is able to make that connection between strategy and execution. So it's someone who owns, let's say, the operation, and it's kind of clear about the cadence, of the work and how to coordinate the work that has to be done. And I think it's kind of good to say as well that we're not talking about having a COO for every single organization. Like like sometimes you're not even at that stage yet, but that's okay. I think the main idea here is to have someone in your team that could be that person that helps the leader, the CEO, the executive director to organize things on the ground and makes this connection between strategy and operations, right? So what happens when you have that, sometimes it's just like it could be even like someone who is already in your team, right? But does not have necessarily that responsibility yet. But once that person is able to take on those responsibilities, naturally what happens is that the leader, the executive director, or the CEO has more time to fundraise, to do public face, things, and it's easier to tell a story of growth as well. Like once you have the systems in place, in a way, it's easier to see where things are going. And in a way, as we mentioned before, donors, when they see that there's someone running the operations, they feel more confident as well as they engage with that mission.
Yeah, and I think this sort of takes us to our second point. Often we see the need for a COO or a connector, as you've called it,
Mhm.
when the nonprofit starts growing, starts scaling.
Correct.
You see that friction or that tender spot a little bit more clearly in that leadership thing. And so, talk to me a little bit about, okay, so you've got the CEO, now we're growing.
Mhm.
Now what? What does that look like? Where are the tensions? What are some things that you see around operations that really influence how nonprofits can scale well and how maybe they fall into a couple of traps?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's tied to the first one, and that's actually, yeah, the second, top problem I think I would highlight today would be scaling without the proper infrastructure. And I think what it looks like is, so this organization is growing. We're talking about more programs. We're talking about consequently more donors. We're talking about more reporting requirements, but then you still have the same infrastructure to give, you know, to make sure that all of these things are still happening, right? The problem is that it's not very compelling a case for operations. Donors are usually very much excited about capital projects, for example. It's a new building, it's a new car, it's a new uh, kitchen. It's something that kind of is tangible for them. But when you go out and say, hey, we're fundraising for this operational thing, which is actually just running things as they should run, it's not exciting. It's not very compelling in terms of a story that you tell. So there's kind of fear that the donor will kind of push back when you come up with this, right? The problem is that if you don't have, the infrastructure in place for the scale that you're kind of trying to achieve, you have people creating workarounds all the time. So staff to get that work done, so now you have more programs, you have more stuff happening. Staff starts creating some workarounds. It's that shadow
Right.
Excel spreadsheet that lives somewhere, in the
Yeah,
your
on
drive.
someone's computer somewhere.
Exactly. And then the systems then start not talking to each other. So even people within the team, they don't communicate exactly, or precisely about what they're doing. And then um, every single time that we have new thing added to the this kind of plate of things to do, it becomes like a heroic kind of feat. Like you hope that people will show up and do their work to give, to take care of that new thing that just came up. So you don't have a system in place. Someone has to be the hero to solve that problem, and then we start kind of, putting fires here and there all the time, right? And then, of course, when you need to create a report or something, you can't, because it's impossible to track everything you have done and report it back, right? So there's this constant sense of putting fires all the time.
Yeah. And I think when a nonprofit starts scaling without that foundational infrastructure, where the infrastructure is not built out first, which, let's be real, all of us who have worked in nonprofits, none of us are building infrastructure first. We're often meeting the need of our ministry mission, right? More kids need after school programming, more lunches need to be made, whatever the ministry is. We're always meeting the need first and building infrastructure after. And it's challenging to think about either simultaneously building infrastructure or even getting ahead. And so, and to your point, it's not easy to fundraise per se for operations. So, what do we need to do? And we need to invest in the right people. You need to have the right, when you're scaling, you need to acknowledge the burden on your staff. You need to constantly be in this space of reevaluating your systems and how you operate, activate them in meaningful ways. And I can say again, like pointing to KC, we have just taken a hard look at some of our systems and said, these are good systems. We're not using them to their full potential. And so how do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
And you obviously are a big part of that. You're working very diligently to pull us all back into line around how we use our systems, which is good. And you have to be reminded of that. That's the other part too. And so, you know, then you see this like shift. It's like, okay, now staff aren't scrambling to do it. Now they get to actually do the work that they're passionate about, and they don't have to worry about the infrastructure. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
Am I on the right track?
Absolutely. No, and I feel like, I for those people who, are used to go to any kind of church or ceremony, like if you have like a paper that tells you what's gonna happen, like we call it liturgy or
Program.
program
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
um your mind is a little bit at ease there because you know when you have to stand up, when you sit down, when you read the passage, when you sing, when you say something or don't say something.
Right.
It kind of brings you like some kind of ease in that sense so you can engage in that function a little bit more fully. I think it's the same in if we have enough systems around us that help us with the work, a daily work, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I don't have to create an extra spreadsheet to do my work there. And we're not talking necessarily, and I just wanted to be clear here, but like we're not talking necessarily about uh, systems that you pay a lot of money for. We're talking about processes and systems that organize work in a way. Sometimes you're going to have to buy something. Yes. Sometimes you're going to have to hire someone. Sometimes you're going to have to have external help. It could be any of these things. Now, what I would suggest to those who are listening to us here is that as you take a hard look at what's going on inside of your organization, you start telling a story. So here's where we were, here's where we're going, and then here, like, this is the need we have. As you make that a story, it's easier to present that to donors, for example.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we've hit two big topics. First,
Mhm.
leadership. Second, scaling. And third, maybe the most important, are the people, the human component of every nonprofit. And we talked about leadership in terms of growth. We're talking about scaling in terms of, systems and growth within the organization. But the most important function, most important piece of all that are the people that you have in your organization, nonprofit, business, whatever. Talk to us a little bit about where the challenges can come in around people.
Yeah, so when we're growing, usually, particularly the nonprofit work, it's very organic. All the processes are organic. So you have like part-timers that are added, come to added to the team. You have people changing their roles to adjust and adapt, according to the needs, and then you have like the need being adjusted to the people because you hired that person because he's a good person, but then, well, what kind of work can he or she do, right? Like, so it's kind of the person dictates the role in a way, and then naturally you have like a lot of things having to be done, but then you don't have enough team or don't have like enough staff to cover all of that, right? So a common example of that, as I mentioned, is like the heavy reliance, for example, on part-time roles. That's kind of a
Right.
reality of nonprofits, right? So what happens is that again, like it fragments everything, right? And the problem with that is you have not only the fragmentation of the daily work, but you also have knowledge loss. For example, when someone leaves and they are the only person that
Right.
knows that thing,
Yeah. All the things.
all,
Yeah.
all the things are gone, right? And then again, like who's taking care of our donors, for example? Who's doing the reporting for them? Who's giving our donors follow up, or who's kind of calling them to thank them, or something along these lines? So, unfortunately, and this is not very uncommon, unfortunately, there's burnout. Burnout happens in nonprofits like more than we would like to see, right? So I think there are a few ways of dealing with that. Um, but I just wanted to hear from you. Like, is that something that you have seen as well? Like in this the staffing part, like having sometimes wrong people, wrong place, wrong numbers.
Sure. Sure, sure. And, I think in some nonprofits, there's a unwillingness to maybe let people go who may not be the right fit because we
Mhm.
so desperately want it to work. I think also there's a scarcity mindset that operates in nonprofits
Mhm.
that either don't allow us to imagine hiring more people or paying people uh, a competitive wage. So we intentionally like job descriptions tend to balloon, but people in time or people in compensation maybe don't. And so there's a misalignment there that happens. So I think anytime a nonprofit's looking to grow, I think you have to have a hard look at, do you have the staffing capacity? Do you have the right skills in within your team? Or do you have to wait?
Mhm.
And not everybody wants to wait all the time.
Yeah, that's right. That's
We are pushed in this world to grow, grow, grow. Um, and sometimes we are not thoughtful enough to make sure that we have, back to the second issue, the infrastructure, but also the people capacity to do it. Um,
yeah.
and sometimes you need that outside voice to kind of look and objectively say, like, hey, you know, you're doing great work.
Mm.
The mission is on point.
Mhm.
You even have a ton of donors behind it. But internally, you need to do some of the hard work
Mm.
of looking internal and carving out intentional space to do that. I think that's the other really hard thing nonprofits do, is to pause
Mhm. Mhm.
and to look. And so, you know, it's not easy. Nonprofit work's not
Yeah.
easy. You and I both know that. We've both been in it.
Yeah.
And now, what we do as our work as KC is to kind of come alongside and say, okay, let's just pause
Mhm.
and look at these things, these operational things, before we start looking at your fundraising strategy, because how are we creating a narrative that encompasses this holistically?
Mm.
I think that's been one of the most interesting pieces of our work,
Mhm.
um, and honestly, one of the most fun parts too.
Right. Yes, yes. We understand that fundraising is not a thing on its own. It depends on so many other variables as well. So, in order for a nonprofit to do fundraising well, all of these pieces have to be in place as well. So we don't, and we see that we don't treat fundraising as just asking for money. The way I see Casey doing the work is kind of looking at all of these things in a very holistic way, making sense of the whole, and then starting to plan and work on fundraising.
Yeah, these all three that you listed, are solvable. These are not like things that you can sit here and think, oh my gosh, this sounds like us, and now are we doomed? Like, no, you're not doomed.
No, you're not.
Uh, Very solvable. These challenges are normal. And I think, especially when it comes around scaling and people, these are actually moments of potential. And so if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, wow, this kind of hits home, or this, I can kind of see us in that, like, reach out. We'd love to talk more about it. It's just a fun conversation to have. And sometimes it's nice to have a conversation with someone who's not in it with you in that same sort of way. It's not the person in the chair next to you, but someone outside just going, hey, this sounds like us. What do you think? We'd love to chat. Yeah. Thanks, Gustavo.
Thank you.
We're super glad you're here helping us get under control. And we look forward to seeing what happens with us and with all of our clients due to your skill set and work. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Nat. It's very good to be here. Very good to be with Casey, and I'm looking forward to the work we have to do together.